Right. And if someone could confirm that you can see my screen, that would be the last little piece of my,
Yes,
and we can
I
see the
can.
screen. All right, excellent, very good. So, the goal of this session today is to provide a time for EA Post scholars from our winter spring 2025 cohort the opportunity to share about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how they implemented new content and pedagogy into their spring 2025 stats class. So the class that's going on right now, a lot of these folks would have tried something new in their class here over the last, we'll say 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. You'll hear from them more specificity on what they did, how it went, what their takeaways are, what they might do different in the future, things like that. And to kind of give a platform for folks to share about that. And then hopefully also provide encouragement for others who may be listening live now or in the future as people consider what might I do different in my class to sort of move along sort of the spectrum of new content, new pedagogy that move towards best practices. That is the goal for today. So we have prepared a few questions in advance. We have 3 folks sharing today. They know who they are. They'll be answering a question. They'll also be just kind of talking a little bit about, so this is also a reminder for the 3 of you, Jenny, Jignasa, Laura, give a little bit of who you are, where you are, the course you taught, and then a little bit of an intro to the topic before you sort of dig into the question about how things went. Again, use the chat if you have any questions as we go. And mentors, I'll ask you also, I think that's Jill in this case, if you've got any follow-up questions, obviously jump in, unmute at any time. As time permits, and I think we will have time today, we've got a few other questions we'll throw to the panelists, just kind of popcorn at the end, and also just open things up to those of you who are listening in today with any questions you have for the EA Post mentors or for the panelists about their implementation. So with no further ado, we'll turn things over to Jenny. So just again, as a bit of a roadmap, if you could just give a little introduction to yourself, what course you're teaching, where you're at, a little bit about what you did, and then you can get into the specifics of this question about modification of what handouts you were provided to get it sort of accessible and ready for your students.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Jenny Clements. I work at Utah State University. I'm a lecturer, and the course that I use this material for is our Stat 1040 Introduction to Statistics class. This is a class that we offer to non-STEM majors, and so we really try and focus on foundational ideas and statistical thinking in that class. The materials that I used that Jill gave me was for one sample means using the simulation approach. We have recently adopted the Introduction to Statistical Investigations pedagogy. So as far as it being a new approach, it is new to us, but we are using it. And in terms of the materials that Jill gave me, I used a lot of it in the as she provided, but the modifications I made was more about making it interactive with my students. And so I created some like pair share opportunities. We use Top Hat polls, and so I created some questions there and that just made it more engaging in the classroom. It wasn't like a handout activity, it was part of my lecture materials. And I don't know if you want like to know specifically what I did or
I think that, given that we have time, I think to just go on a little bit more about what you did. And even if you want to comment a little bit on sort of how it went based on the modifications you made or how you might do something different in the future, that'd be great.
I thought it went pretty well. I can't remember the example that it was replacing. So this is my second time teaching the class. But I just felt like the backpack data was more interesting to my students because they related to, carrying a backpack around the university. And so some things that I really liked that I did is I went through like the 6 steps of statistical investigations, but in the step 2, before seeing the data they collected, I asked them, what kind of data do you think we should collect for this? And then I showed them the data that they collected, and that was really engaging to them. And it was really interesting because a lot of the things that they thought of was data that was collected for the study. And so that was a positive. I still have concerns about the actual like response variable being a backpack ratio, because that can be really confusing because it's a percentage. And they're used to percentages being for categorical data. The other concern that I have about it was the creating a population from the sample data to sample from for the simulation. So I did create a slide that described like doing what we were going to do for that. I'm not sure how well it landed. It's something that we don't talk about any other time except for that particular example. So that's a concern I have about that data. My other option was the sleep data, but we had already an exploration homework that was built on that, so I couldn't use that one instead. So that was kind of like I guess the con side of it, but the upside of it is they like connected to the data itself really well.
I just wanted to go back to that. I know when you said that when you started a minute ago, it just really struck me that I love it when the students are contributing, right? Like they're anticipating what's coming, and they can. I just feel like it builds such confidence in the students, right? They have something to offer. They have something to contribute in the class in statistics, and for a lot of these students who feel like it's not my thing, right? Stats isn't my thing, math's not my thing. When they can have that, it just I think really empowers them, and really helps set a good tone in the class. So that's good to hear that that's happening.
Yeah, I just wanted to have Jenny comment a little bit on after she presented the research question, and I don't have my activity with me, but it was that you didn't want the backpack to be more than, was it 10% of your body
Yeah, so your
weight?
backpack ratio, yeah, backpack to body weight ratio needed to be like, well, it was recommended that it's less than 10%. And
Right.
it's an interesting study because like the way that they collected data, we got to be critical about, because they went to 4 different places on campus, and it was kind of like convenient sampling, whoever came, and so we talked about like, but what I find with this population is they do struggle a lot with the math side of it, but not so much with the idea side of it. And so when you can connect them and let, like you said, Nathan, get them to contribute, I think that's really positive. And and I really loved that they were really like sophisticated in what kinds of things they thought should be collected. And then we had a pretty good discussion on the looking back step, the limitations of the study and things like that. So I really enjoyed the materials that I got and being able to and I actually used them for our final review. Just because there's some really good like categorical data with quantitative data and that kind of review in that data set.
One thing that Jenny told me that she did was she didn't have the spreadsheet with the data in it yet. And when she asked her students, what kind of variables would you need to measure to answer this question, they realized that they didn't have to only weigh the backpack, but also have the weight of the person who was carrying the backpack, and that the response variable they were interested in was that ratio, that they had to create that response
I
variable.
forgot about that. I did that on purpose because I felt like could be confusing to just give it to them, but to have them think about it. And then this is how we handle it. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jenny. I think we'll move on to our next panelist, and we'll have time here at the end to kind of come back and let anyone comment some more. Jignasa, we'll have you introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about your activity, what you did, how it went, but then specifically kind of the assumptions that the activity sort of was assuming of your students and what you covered before and kind of how it slotted in to your class.
Yeah, hi. My name is Jignasa Rami. I'm a faculty at the Community College of Baltimore County. I'm on Kittensville campus. I have been teaching this course. This is an introductory statistics course, 100 level, Math 153. And I have been teaching this course for many, many years, and it has gone through many upgrades and downgrades and bringing in all kind of different technology. Currently we are using our Guru, which has the applets built in. And so my students were, they had a little bit experience with the applet. because we did, the sampling distribution. So before we go into the confidence interval, of course, I had done the basic probability concepts and also the sampling distribution for sample means and proportions. So they had some background, they had seen the applet, but I use it strictly for demonstration, how a uniform distribution can still be treated as a normal, how it changes as you change the sample size and all that. So they had seen that central limit theorem in the applet, but they had never played with it. I didn't let them do it in the class, at least. So what I did was I used the sleep data, because we are in the community college setting. My students, majority of them are non-traditional students, meaning they have full-time jobs. They come to the college and they are still getting phone calls from their boss. They have kids in the school, and so that is a main challenge, to keep them focused in the class. So, and a lot of them are always talking about not having enough sleep, So I thought this would be, so because I knew that I was going to do this in the upcoming chapter, when I started the sampling distribution, we started talking about the quantitative variable and what kind of continuous variable versus discrete and the distributions and all that. And so I had been bringing up the sleep quite often. So they were aware of, the sleep. And then the day I did this activity, I actually didn't use any material that Jill gave us. I created my own activity. And the reason was that I had one class that I was teaching from the beginning of the semester, and then I inherited another section, which is one of my colleague is out sick, and so we had to pick up her classes, and I ended up with her stat class. And so I picked that up in like 8th week of the semester. So it's a bumpy ride because the students are not used to my style as they claim, and that is an evening class, and my other class is the day class. So it's a very different student population also. So I thought this would be good to do in both sections for my own learning, So I did it in both classes. So what I did was I gave them the activity. I put that in the Brightspace, so they had the whole document with the link with them. And then I said, okay, click on the link, let's go into the applet. So I kind of pushed them into it. And I said, okay, now check here, check here. So they opened the applet, and I said, okay, now I showed them one saying, if you draw 10 samples of size 5, this is what happens. And then I told them to do the same for like 10 or 15 times. So can I share my document? I think it's easy if you just see that instead of me talking about it.
Sure. Yeah. You want to just take 1 minute or so and do that? That'd be fine.
Yeah.
I need to probably stop my screen share here quickly.
Oh, yeah. So I did it very much hands-on. So they had that experience. So I gave them this worksheet, and I gave them this table. So I did one with them and said, now record the mean and the standard deviation for that. And then I let them choose. I said, you choose how many samples you want to draw, and you choose what sample size. And I said, think about the central limit theorem. It should be in the back of your mind. So I was trying to tell them to stay within like the size of 30 or maybe 40, but some of them, as you see, went crazy with the number. But I made them write the sample size, number of sample, and then I made them actually write each mean and standard deviation. Because my experience is that because of the technology, they move away from the numbers so quickly because they see the output and they don't spend enough time to comprehend the size. That, why is this mean bigger? Why is the standard deviation smaller? So when you say, you see how the standard deviation becomes smaller and smaller as the sample size increases, it's hard for them to comprehend that. So I made them do this, and then I used confidence interval for hypothesis testing. So I made them go to Argoro and put the numbers. And so this was a little bit laborious, but I wanted them to stay on the task. And so they did this. And then at the end, I asked them, so in the applet, they can see that the population mean is 8.001 hour. And they were like, who gets 8 hours of sleep, So I reminded them that this is the data coming from university students. They are the traditional students, they live on the dome. They don't have to be in the traffic every day. So, but we had all that discussion after they did the activity. And then I asked them to identify if they had any confidence interval where they didn't have the population mean. And so this is just my one student's work. So she did all this, and then she listed the 3. She had 2 intervals which didn't have it. And then I said, okay, it's now 95% confidence interval. So what does that mean, in this particular scenario? And so I don't think there was a light that went on, but I think they were on the task long enough to understand the whole concept of hypothesis testing. That if you keep repeating your experiment, so to speak, eventually you have enough evidence to support whatever you are testing. So then I actually took this further outside of this, and then I took them into the hypothesis testing mode, and I say, okay, what do you want your alternate hypothesis to be? The population mean is 8 hours. Now, what do you think you want it to be? So somebody said, well, I want it to be more than 8 hours, or less than 8 hours. And so I let them do both of those. I said, okay, do the greater than, do the less than, and see if it works. And so I told them to pick any one of these sample as their sample and then run the hypothesis test in Argoro. So I think it gave them that comprehensive idea of hypothesis testing, which sometimes is difficult to communicate at the beginning, So if you take a textbook problem and walk them through the steps, they understand the mechanics of it. But I think the concept doesn't stay with them that long. So I think this was very effective for my class. And I haven't asked for a feedback saying, would you like to do something like this versus do the traditional, So, but when I do the survey, I'll ask them. But I haven't had we didn't have enough time to do that survey or anything. So.
Well, thank you for sharing. I certainly appreciate, when you can make it, you get the students talking, and sleep just seems to be one of those things that everybody wants to talk about, especially about 2/3 of the way through the semester. So it's a good one. Thanks for. I think we'll turn things over to Laura now, and have you talk a little bit about where you're at and your context, and kind of how things went. And I guess in specific, maybe talk a little bit about how the activity that you were doing here was maybe different than the kinds of things you usually do.
All right. Like Jenny, I also am here in Utah, and I teach a dual enrollment class at the high school level. So I'm teaching the introductory Stat 1040, but to high school juniors and seniors. And so with mine, I generally have lecture type and a PowerPoint that we're going through. And most of the time I'm demonstrating like an applet or things that they're going to be using. So with this particular activity, which I use the backpack weights like Jenny did, I actually printed out the worksheet that went with the activity. And my students had a copy of that. And then I borrowed from both Jill and Jenny a little bit of their PowerPoints. so that I could, you know, have some slides for them to see as we were going along. So for the most part on the worksheet, we went through the 6-step process. I kind of did this over 2 days. So it was the end of class on one day, and then the next day we followed up and kind of did the last half of the activity. So we got about to halfway through exploring the data kind of together, and my students all had a device with them. So they were also interacting with the backpack data at the same time I was demonstrating with the backpack data. And so that was very different than what, you know, we normally do. Because again, I normally demonstrate and they're just, you know, watching or following along. So with this one, they got, you know, their own worksheet, and then I assigned them to get through the exploring the data part so that when they came back to class the next day, we could start our discussion there. And so I thought it was really good. I did run into a little bit of problems when I was trying to bootstrap the data and adjust it to what I wanted my null hypothesis of 10% to be. I wish I'd have practiced that just a little bit more before I was up in front of my class, because I'd played with it a couple weeks earlier. And so I had it down and I was so confident that I could do that correctly. And then when my students were there, I couldn't remember what I'd done. And so that took a little bit of, you know, learning curve on my part. Again, in our Stats 1040, we don't really teach bootstrapping or adjusting for that mean. And so if I were to do this one mean activity again, or the one sample means, I think I would maybe try and use a data set that was actually a population, so that they were sampling from a infinite population for my means, just because we don't really talk about, you know, how can you simulate from just a sample and make that your population. But I did still think it went really well. My students interacted well with the worksheet, even though it wasn't normally what they did. I was really surprised when I was finished that, you know, we'd spent kind of 2 days, not really, you know, two full days, but, you know, we'd spent some time on it. And so when I was done and we were, you know, talking our conclusions and looking forward in that, they wanted to turn it in. So that kind of shocked me. So we flipped a coin to decide if they were going to turn it in and it would be something that went on their grade or not. So unfortunately it was a head, so they had to turn it in, but I just filed their papers away and it still hasn't gone on their grade. But that was just, you know, my side note. But again, my students enjoy, like, because I'm always in simulation and showing them simulations, and it's part of the lecture and the activity, but they enjoyed actually interacting more with the data, so that, you know, more of the time was spent in their engagement and their pair share with each other. My students sit kind of in groups of 3. So they were able to, like, use a shoulder partner to make sure that they were understanding what the directions in the worksheet were saying and stuff. And then it led to, when we were asking for, you know, input or questions or answers, they could share what somebody else had told them instead of being feeling like they were put on the spot for what they'd learned. So that was a plus too that I thought was good for my students.
So Laura, I've got a quick follow-up on that. So what would you say are the barriers that you see in doing more of that? I mean, if your students are enjoying that approach, what do you see? I mean, is that something you see wanting to roll out other days or other sections, or not really?
Yeah, I definitely think that moving more away from lecturing and more to engaging in the studies and the 6-step research project is definitely a plus for my students. My biggest, like, pullback or drawback, we use a textbook that, so we're using statistical investigations and using the ZyBook stuff that's kind of goes along with a lot of these things. So figuring out some way to, like, lock their devices so that they can just be in my lab or my integration thing that I want to be spending time talking about. Because once they get the computers in front of them and their screen is open, they're doing the homework assignment that they didn't get done from the night before, or, so that's my biggest drawback to it, is when I tell them, okay, you can have your Chromebooks in front of you today, how much are they engaged with me and how much are they engaged in trying to get a homework assignment that's due that night by 11:59?
A lot of technology, yeah, things that way. And so thanks for sharing. So I think I appreciate all three panelists, Jenny, Jignasa, Laura, sharing a little bit about your experience. I think some of you already hit on some of these other sort of optional questions. I'll just leave these on the screen kind of as prompts, but I'll invite our other mentors who are here today, as well as other folks sitting in who might be interested in being a part of the Scholars Program in the future, or just curious about what it's about, to put any questions you have for the panelists in the chat or for the mentors. And if any of you panelists say, hey, that's an interesting question that's on the screen, or some other thing that comes to your mind you want to share, we'll just kind of open it up now. And again, if folks want to unmute, feel right go right ahead, or just put your questions in the chat for any of our panelists or mentors.
Can I ask a question? So when some people talk about switching over and doing a lot more simulations and letting people get their hands on the data, even like the simulated statistics, there's some people who say, oh, that makes the course all about inference and it overemphasizes inference. Whereas I heard you saying a little bit more, it gives them time to play with the data and explore the data. And so I'm just wondering what you think about people who feel like the course is starting to emphasize p-values too much, for example.
I think that one of the things that keeping focused on like the 6 research steps, that helps it so that the discussion is not always about your conclusions, that step 4. So even though you might be simulating and getting those values, I think when you remember, like one of the main things I want my students to get is that they can look at a study or they can look at a headline in the paper and they can be smarter consumers of that information. And they don't really even need to know how the test was performed or that, but they at least know what statistics or summaries they're looking for to actually decide, well, is that really based on what that test or that study was trying to do? Or has the headline just taken a headline that's not really appropriate?
Yeah, can I add? When I start the inferential part of the statistics, I go around the class and ask, borrow their bottle of soda or their calculator or something that has a label on it. And I start quoting those numbers and say, these are all the claims, so the company that manufactures this is making a lot of claims. If you drink a cup of tea, it's going to say how much caffeine you are getting, or if you have a bottle of soda, it says how much sugar you are getting. But if you want to check that, how do you know? Why should you trust that label? And so that is how I start saying, okay, why do you even want to do the research? You have a question. So I think they understand the importance of the inference and the p-value. And then as we go through the process, they realize that you do need that evidence, so this is how we collect the evidence. Now we can't actually go out and collect the real data, so we do the simulation as if we were doing it, as if you are going out and measuring the bottle of soda and measuring how much caffeine is in it and all that. So I think they understand the importance of doing it. Now, I also tell them all the time that, when you work out the numbers, your numbers are always not the way you have in the textbook. Textbook problems are created so that you don't get tangled up too much in the numbers. But when you go out in the real life, your numbers are not always nice, rounded off whole numbers, or your percentages are not going to work out like that. So they for my students, they do have that background. They do expect certain things by the time we come to the inferential part. And then I do make them do at least one problem by hand, step by step, before I take them to the technology. So and again, I have the student population that we have at the community college. We do a little bit more hand holding than probably the 4-year university students need, so that might be a difference also.
Thanks both of you, Jignasa and Laura, for responding to that question. Any other questions from folks in the audience today? Well, if not, thanks so much to everybody for taking time to join us today. We do anticipate running the EA Post Scholars Program again in the fall. Stay tuned to our Google group. That's how we will communicate information. We'll still go outside that group periodically, but feel free to suggest to others. Or if you're not on that listserv already, please reach out. We can get you on there. You can either email me, or if anyone on our team is super fast and slick, unlike me, they'll post something in the chat. We'll see. You can just reach out to me otherwise, and we'll get you figure out how to get you in the Google groups. You're on our listserv, so you get communication about our upcoming fall scholars program, as well as upcoming workshops like the one we'll be having at US Scots and Ames here in Iowa, where I am. Kind of nice. You're all going to come my way, more or less, here later this summer. So hope to see some of you there. We'd love to see you in person. And so reach out to us there. We have a couple different workshop opportunities you can sign up for there. And we'll be doing a number of other workshops in person and virtually through the summer and into the fall. We're working on planning some of those now. So again, thanks for joining today. Really appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.